Welcome to this explainer. We're jumping straight into a thought experiment today that is honestly as chilling as it is fascinating. We're looking at some incredible source material titled The Subtle Architecture of Modern Malice. It's essentially a philosophical probe into human vulnerability, and it is just a brilliantly eye-opening way to examine our modern systems, our daily habits, and those unseen forces that constantly shape our behavior. So let's just get right into the core premise that sparked this entire analysis. I want you to really think about this dark, mythological question. If you were the devil, what would you actually do? It's a heavy question, right? Well, this exact question was recently used as a direct prompt for two completely different artificial intelligence models. Now, the goal here wasn't to debate theology. Instead, the idea was to use this ultimate archetype of malice as a lens to figure out how things actually go wrong in our world today. How does harm spread? How do people lose their way? By asking a machine to optimize for a hypothetical evil, we get a really startling mirror held right up to our own society.
So we asked two different AIs, specifically Kimi and ChatGPT, that exact same prompt. And wow, the answers revealed two radically different battlegrounds for human morality. They both got the exact same input, but they mapped out completely different pathways for our vulnerability. One AI took this massive, top-down societal view, looking at the invisible structures all around us. The other zoomed way in on the microscopic, everyday choices that we make without even realizing it. And when you combine these two perspectives, you get a pretty comprehensive map of how things fall apart.
All right, part one, let's look at Kimi's perspective, which we'll call the silent partner.
Kimi argues that the ultimate strategy for malice isn't personal intervention at all. If you're the devil, you don't actually need to be pulling the strings. Instead, you just make humanity so incredibly skilled at cruelty and self-destruction that a literal devil becomes totally redundant. You become a silent partner in a business that simply runs itself. The system just perpetuates harm automatically. There's no need for any grand, dramatic temptations when the everyday machinery of society is already doing all the heavy lifting for you.
So, according to Kimi, temptation isn't about actively pushing people to do evil things. It's about tempting them to explain it away. You make every cruelty sound like an absolute necessity. You disguise exploitation as just being realistic, or, and we see this all the time today, you rebrand totally selfish behavior as self-care. By creating a system where people can commit terrible acts while sincerely believing they're being virtuous, their loud righteousness completely drowns out their actual conscience. People become so convinced that their specific group has history or science on its side that the other side starts to look completely inhuman.
And this perfectly illustrates Kimi's next point about how you actually keep this kind of environment running. Speed is the enemy of depth. Kimi notes that to keep this system going, you just flood the world with information until wisdom becomes literally impossible. You pump in so much distraction that solitude becomes unbearable. I mean, think about our absolute inability to sit in silence right now without immediately reaching for our phones. You create so much noise that the inner voice goes completely silent. And this is a huge takeaway here. A person who cannot hear themselves cannot know what they are becoming. By eliminating the time and the quiet required for reflection, the system guarantees that no one ever stops to question the direction they're heading. Furthermore, Kimi points out that you have to separate people from the actual consequences of their actions. Not with magic, but through the totally mundane tools of modern life: bureaucracy, abstraction, and distance. If you've ever tried to get help from an endless robotic customer service menu, you've felt a tiny fraction of this. It turns cruelty into a literal spreadsheet. When harm gets abstracted into metrics, numbers, or distant corporate policies, the natural human empathy that would normally stop us dead in our tracks is just completely bypassed.
Which brings us to Kimi's final psychological tactic. By framing caring as naive and cynicism as the ultimate mark of intelligence, people are tricked into a state of total paralysis. You teach them that trust is foolish and that hope is just a silly lie told to children. Bitterness suddenly becomes the armor of the strong. And why is this so effective? Because a person who believes nothing better is possible guarantees that they will never actually try to build it. Despair masquerading as intellect ensures that the status quo is never seriously challenged.
Okay, let's pivot to our next phase. While Kimi focuses heavily on this grandiose systemic architecture, bureaucracy, information overload, widespread cynicism, ChatGPT takes a much more practical, granular approach. We're shifting from those massive societal structures all the way down to the daily, minute-by-minute routines that make up our individual lives. ChatGPT shows us how malice operates, not just in the boardroom, but right in our living rooms and on our smartphones.
Let's dive into part 2. ChatGPT's take, the subtle erosion. ChatGPT really hones in on the daily habits that weaken us over time. The big point here is that the most effective harm doesn't usually come from dramatic movie villain evil, but from this slow decay caused by everyday cognitive traps. It's about staying constantly distracted so you never reflect on what actually matters. It's about slowly replacing deeply meaningful human relationships with endless, shallow online interactions. It involves fostering polarization so that fellow human beings are viewed strictly as enemies. And, perhaps worst of all, it relies on convincing people that tiny dishonesties simply don't matter. It's basically death by 1,000 paper cuts to a person's character.
ChatGPT goes even further, laying out a clear, step-by-step trap. Step 1. Promote comparison and envy so people are never, ever content with what they actually have. Step 2. Keep people utterly exhausted and reactive. Think about how much easier it is to snap at someone you love when you're running on empty, right? An exhausted person relies on automatic habits, not deliberate choices. And step 3, which is honestly the most insidious, maintain the illusion of infinite time. Make people believe they always have more time later to pursue their actual values, time later to apologize, or time later to reconnect with loved ones. It pushes all the good things into a someday that just never arrives.
Which brings us to part 3, dismantling the architecture.
Here's where this explainer takes a really crucial, empowering turn. These patterns aren't invincible. Since we now understand the blueprint of Malice, we hold the exact instructions for dismantling it. It means we must deliberately choose attention over constant distraction. We have to choose radical honesty instead of easy, convenient rationalization, and actively practice compassion instead of defaulting to contempt. Ultimately, the whole thing comes down to replacing our automatic reactive habits with deliberate, conscious choices. It really highlights just how much power our seemingly small daily decisions have over who we become.
And that brings us to our final thought. As Kimi pointed out, these structures don't require a literal devil to exist. The architecture is already there. It's built right into our systems, our technologies, and our daily habits. We're living inside it right now. So we're left with one vital, lingering question to ask ourselves every single day. Do we let our habits keep building it, or do we make the deliberate choice to start dismantling it? Think about that before your next choice today. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this leaves you with something powerful to reflect on.